Is it true that a man sometimes called a legend in bodybuilding once got down to almost 0% body fat? Is that even possible? And how low is too low? When Arnold Schwarzenegger was asked to play Conan the Barbarian, his breakthrough acting role after claiming the Mr. Olympia title 7 times, he had so little fat on him, he was asked to add some fat to his body. When Brad Pitt got down to 6% body fat for his role as Tyler Durden in the cult classic movie Fight Club, his physique became the kind of holy grail of the male body. This is what men want, we were told. But is it unhealthy? When Christian Bale lost 62 pounds for his role in The Machinist, going from 182 pounds to just 120, no one in their right mind would say they wanted a body like that. Today, we're going to explore the limits of the human body. Just how much can it take when we get rid of fat? When we talk about healthy weight, we're getting to a controversial area. You might, for instance, find out online that you're overweight because you used one of those BMI or body mass index calculators, and it told you bad news. BMI, which is your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared, doesn't tell you what percentage of body fat you have. You may still have high BMI but have lots of lean muscle, and you might have a low BMI and be skinny but still have excess body fat. Still, BMI is a fairly good method of working out if you have too much fat on you without having to do scans, such as a dual energy X-ray absorptiometry scan, aka DEXA, which can indeed tell you with quite a high accuracy how much body fat you have. Most of the time, you probably know just by looking at yourself in the mirror if you have too much or too little body fat. The fat under your skin is your subcutaneous fat. You can feel that fat on your belly or your arms, but you can't feel visceral fat, the fat inside of you, wrapping around your internal organs. As you can guess, you don't want too much visceral fat. An excess of this stuff has been linked to all kinds of badness, including high cholesterol, high blood pressure, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, stroke, and even Alzheimer's. A fatty liver, aka non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD, affects 1 in 4 adult Americans. You might need a CT scan or an MRI to know if you have too much visceral fat. But there's a very crude way to measure the visceral fat on your belly. If you grab a hold of a tape measure and wrap it around your waist, if you're a woman and it's over 35 inches, this could mean you have an excess of visceral fat. With guys, over 40 inches is when you might want to be concerned. If you have a high BMI and a worrying amount of weight around your belly, you might have an unhealthy amount of fat on you. A study at Oxford University said when this is severe, it could reduce someone's average life expectancy by 10 years, similar to smoking. The researchers wrote, obesity increases death rates for some types of cancer, but the main way it kills is by increasing risk of heart disease and stroke. They also said life expectancy was reduced for people who were very thin, too thin, according to what are deemed healthy standards. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says a normal BMI for someone over 20 falls between 18.5 and 24.9. So anything under that can be said to be underweight, and anything just over that is called overweight. A 25 to 29.9 BMI is called preobesity. The WHO says between 35 and 39.9 is obesity class 2, and anything above 40 is obesity class 3. The term you've all likely heard is morbid obesity, relating to the word morbidity, an illness or condition that can affect mortality. In case you haven't been looking, there's a lot of obesity in the USA. The average BMI in the US is 26.6 for adult men and 26.5 for adult women. According to data from the U.S. National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, almost 1 in 3 adults, 30.7%, are overweight. Over 2 in 5 adults, 42.4%, have obesity, and about 1 in 11 adults, 9.2%, have severe obesity. For young people in the U.S. aged 2 to 19, about 1 in 6 are overweight, and 1 in 5 are obese. 1 in 16 are severely obese. The U.S. and the U.K. are said to have the highest levels of obesity in the highly developed world, but they aren't the most obese countries in the entire world. Nations such as Nauru, 61% obesity, Cook Islands, 55.9%, and Palau at 55.3% beat the US and the UK hands down. In the UK, the Health Survey for England 2021 said that 25.9% of adults in England were obese, and 37.9% were overweight but not obese. As is often the case, the most deprived areas had the highest rates of obesity. An obesity map the researchers created showed that once you pass the middle of the country, aka the Midlands, the obesity rates generally climb. Researchers have talked about a north-south divide, with the north faring worse economically in terms of general health. The obesity map is a startling example of this. The states in the U.S. with the highest rates of obesity are West Virginia, 40.6%, Kentucky 40.3, Alabama 39.9, Oklahoma 39.4, and Mississippi at 39.1%. There seems to be some correlation between poverty and obesity here too, with the U.S. Census Bureau saying the states with the highest levels of poverty are Mississippi, Louisiana, New Mexico, West Virginia, and Kentucky. Worldwide obesity is said to have more than doubled since 1980. You can read any matter of reports stating that obesity is a much bigger problem than hunger in most countries in the world today. Only about 13% of Americans were obese in 1960. Things remain around that level until 1980. In terms of statistical graphs, this is about the time we can say, Houston, we have liftoff. The obesity rate has skyrocketed since. Talking about Houston, in 2012 and 2013 it used to be called America's fattest city. It's not anymore. A recent study revealed the top 5 cities were McAllen, Edinburgh, Mission, Texas, Shreveport, Bossier City, Louisiana, Memphis, Tennessee, Jackson, Mississippi, and Mobile, Alabama. The obesity rate in McAllen, Edinburgh, Mission is said to be 44.9%. Now, there are many reasons why the world is experiencing an obesity crisis, with one of the leading reasons being a diet of ultra-processed foods packed with sugar. This diet has been exported all over the world. Items that come in colorful packages, often attractively marketed on TV, and most importantly, cheap. Many health experts now say we humans spent too many years demonizing fat when we should have been demonizing high-sugar, ultra-processed food. Recent studies say these foods now make up 73% of the American diet and 56.8% of the British diet. Astonishingly, the British Nutrition Foundation said its survey revealed that 70% of Brits interviewed had not heard of the term ultra-processed food. We thought that was strange until we found a 2022 survey by the International Food Information Council that said 76% of Americans are unfamiliar with what qualifies as an ultra-processed food. For many Americans and people from other countries for that matter, they might wonder why they're not losing weight. In 2018, the CDC reported that 54% of Americans did what the US government advised them to do and get in 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity workouts. That might just entail going for walks. Many other people are recording how many steps they walk. The problem is that you might burn only 200 to 350 calories going for an hour's walk. It might be more depending on your weight and how hard the walk is, but for most people it'll be in that range. A small Domino's pizza, which anyone could manage, is around 1,200 calories. A large pizza might contain between 2,000 to 3,000 calories depending on the crust, what's on it, and the amount of cheese. A bowl of sugary cereal with milk might be in the region of 500 calories. Someone then might have a couple Oreo cookies, 110 calories, maybe a can of Coke, 139 calories, and a bag of chips, 240 calories, and then maybe for dinner they have something like Cheesecake Factory's pasta napolitana, coming in at 2,310 calories. They could have the Sonic Pineapple Upside Down Master Blast shake for dessert, which is another 2,020 calories. That sounds like a lot, but it isn't really, not for the average American, who consumes 3,600 calories a day. Okay, so this is why more and more people over the last 40 years have become obese. The change in diet is the major factor, as might more sedentary lifestyles, but the diet is the main thing. You might now be wondering how to lose the extra weight. Many people these days go without food for a period of anything from 8 hours to an entire day, something called intermittent fasting, which can be very good for you when done right. Back when we were hunter-gatherers, we didn't have a can of Pringles in the pantry, 900 calories a can, to snack on between the bowl of berries we had in the morning. Intermittent fasting is nothing new. We did it for millions and millions of years. When you fast, your body uses up your stored fats for energy. Research shows that 16-8 fasting, meaning eating for 8 hours and fasting for 16, can help with weight loss. But fasting gets dangerous when we do it for too long. To give you an extreme example, in 2023, a pastor in Mozambique died when he tried to replicate Jesus Christ's 40-day fast. The BBC wrote, after 25 days without food or water, he had lost weight to the point where he could not stand up. He was age 39. We doubt he went 25 days without water. Humans generally get very deathly or dead after 3 days without water. Even so, the Guinness World Record says the longest amount of time a human has survived without food and water is 18 days. That was in 1979, when an Austrian teenager named Andreas Mihavich was put in a holding cell and forgotten. As police ignored his mother's pleas on the telephone and he screamed and screamed, he wasted away, although he managed to get some amount of condensed water from the walls. How long we can go without food depends on many things, mostly on how healthy we are and how much fat we have. It's generally thought that people become very weak anywhere from 30 to 50 days, and most will die anywhere from 43 to 70 days. There is the case of the Scottish man Angus Barbieri, who in 1965, when he was 27 years old, started a fast that lasted for 1 year and 17 days. He was 456 pounds, and during his fast, he lost 275.5 pounds. His goal was to get to 180 pounds, so the man did well. Still, you should never ever try anything like that. He did this under the supervision of the University Department of Medicine at the Royal Infirmary of Dundee. What's also very important is the fact that he was given vitamins, electrolytes, and yeast for all of his essential amino acids. He also got tea and coffee, lots of water, and every now and again he might have gotten the odd spoonful of sugar in his drink. Throughout all of this, he was constantly being monitored. He maintained his low weight for the next 20-odd years, but he did die young, aged 51 in 1990. We can't find a cause of death, but it's been speculated that his super long fast might have harmed his body. As you'll see in the show, it's often the case. If you're obese, you could likely live longer than a skinny person if you both went without food but still got water. Those fat reserves would help you in times of need. Nonetheless, people with plenty of fat reserves could still starve to death with much of those reserves left. You'll need the essential vitamins to metabolize your fat stores. You need nutrients and salts. Thin people will generally start to feel really bad health effects of starvation when they've lost about 18% of their body weight. But much bigger people will also feel such negative effects when they still have fat left but have lost around 20% of their body weight. If you were to lose a third of your body weight in a short amount of time, you would be taking a very big risk. So yes, you can die from starvation even if you have plenty of flab on you just because your body needs those nutrients to keep on going. It doesn't matter where you start in terms of your weight. If you give your body nothing, within 8 to 12 weeks you'll probably bite the dust. There might be exceptional cases, but this is how it usually goes down. Władysław Feigl, a Polish prisoner at the Auschwitz concentration camp, noted how some prisoners starved faster than others, but all succumbed in the end. He wrote, "The border between the first and second phases is hard to define. With some, the change happens fast, with others very slowly. In general, one can say that the second phase begins when a person has lost a third of their body weight. No one is superhuman." Feigl describes the effects of starvation as follows. The eyes become dull. The face takes on a non-caring, thoughtless, and sad look. The eyes recede into the head and become fallen in. The skin takes on a gray hue and becomes thin, paper-like, and hard. It also peels. The thinner they got, he said, the more easily they fell victim to infections. That's because without food, severe malnutrition represses our body's immune system responses. Feigl explained, hair becomes colorless and breaks easily. The head becomes elongated, cheekbone and eye sockets become very noticeable. The sick person breathes slowly, speaks quietly, and with great effort. Okay, but what about people who actually want very low body fat rather than victims of horrific human rights abuses? Is it okay to do that sensibly? The American Journal of Clinical Nutrition says a healthy body fat percentage for a man aged 20 to 39 is about 8 to 19%. For a guy 40 to 59, it's 11 to 21%. And for a guy aged 60 to 79, it's 12 to 24%. And in case you're wondering about these age differences, a paper in the National Institutes of Health explained, muscle mass decreases approximately 3 to 8% per decade after the age of 30, and this rate of decline is even higher after the age of 60. Women can have more body fat and be in the healthy bracket since their bodies need more fat due to childbirth. They also burn energy slower after eating due to their higher estrogen levels. For the females of the species, the 20 to 39 age group should have about 21 to 32% body fat. For women aged 40 to 59, the healthy level is 23 to 33, and for 60 to 79, it's 24 to 35% body fat. It's generally thought the average in the US regarding body fat is 28% for men and 40% for women, although most studies on weight in the US use BMI, not body fat levels. Whatever the measurement, it seems in general there's too much body fat around for most of us to enjoy a long life with good health. You might well be under the average and say, hey, I only have 10% body fat. That's fine. Just remember though, you might be thin and still have a lot of visceral body fat. Nonetheless, the average person with about 20% body fat will look like someone we consider an average size. The ultra-obese people who took part in the TV series My 600-Pound Life may have had a body fat percentage in the 66 to 75% range. It's hard to know, as the doctor in that show only usually talked about BMI. Still, a large difference in body fat level is very noticeable. At around 40% body fat for men, people will look like they definitely have a hefty calorie intake. The so-called dad bod, which is neither too fat but also not close to slim, will be the 25 to 30% body fat range. Many male athletes will have a body fat range between 6 and 13%. With female athletes, it's often between 14 and 20% body fat. One of the best soccer players in soccer history, Cristiano Ronaldo, is thought to have just 7% body fat. While most athletes wouldn't go to the trouble posting about their body fat, it's generally thought fighters in the boxing world and the UFC world will have about 9 to 16% body fat, but that's only the men. Women boxers might have 14 to 26% body fat. Saul Canelo Alvarez is said to have 14% body fat when he's fighting fit. The retired British cruiserweight and heavyweight champion David Haye was also ripped, but lately he wrote that he'd put on a lot of weight and then lost it again. He said on his Instagram account, body fat went from 10% to 22.5% in 3 months just by doing what everyone else is doing. I'm not overeating, I was eating desserts and drinking alcohol with everybody else, and this is what happens. Then you have the current heavyweight champ Tyson Fury, who famously ballooned up after he won the world title during a deep, dark period of severe depression. In 2012, when he was much slimmer than he is now, he wrote on Twitter, "After training today, 18.2, 8.4% body fat. He's nowhere near that now, although he's still much slimmer than he was when he hit his peak weight." In 2022, someone asked on Reddit how this guy could be so good when he was around 20% body fat. We won't go into the many reasons, but we will still say someone with a dad bod can still float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. Sticking with British fighters, the heavyweight with the most ripped body right now is Anthony Joshua, who's thought to have 14.7% body fat. Well, that's one estimate. Others have said he was more likely 10% body fat. If we look at sports where people have the lowest body fat on average, sprinters are up there, with men said to have between 8 to 10% body fat and women between 12 and 20%. For swimming, it's 8 to 10% for men, 12 to 20% for women. For basketball, it's 6 to 12% for men and 20 to 27% for women. For gymnastics and long-distance running, it's 5 to 12% for men and 10 to 16% for women. For football, the American kind, backs might be 9 to 12%, but linemen between 15 and 19%. Male cyclists have very low body fat, between 5 and 15% for men. So it seems the lowest body fat you get for professional athletes is about 5%. But if anything is going to beat that, it's going to be bodybuilders, who generally have between 5 and 8% body fat. For women bodybuilders, it's usually 10 to 15%. After all, when these people compete, the whole point is to have turned all their fat into muscle. You can't get any more ripped than a bodybuilder. So you might wonder, why don't they just try to get down to 0% body fat? Why not just lose the excess? Wouldn't that win all the competitions? Well, according to the American College of Sports Medicine, if you go below 3% body fat, you're asking for trouble. Still, people have tried. One of the USA's most decorated Winter Olympians is a man named Apollo Ono, who won a bunch of medals in the 2000s. He said that he had just 2.8% body fat when he was in his prime. When an expert was asked about this by Scientific American, he said yes, that's fine, but only as long as the person is eating the right foods, including a lot of proteins. Okay, but can you go even lower than 3%? In 2019, media articles talked about an American football player named DK Metcalf, saying he was absurdly ripped. He still is, which is evident when you see him play for his team, the Seattle Seahawks. Even so, was he really the 1.6% body fat that was claimed? When a trainer for college football was asked about this, he said he just didn't believe it. He explained, "That's not healthy, and I highly doubt that it's possible for him to perform at a Division I level with that body fat percentage. The lowest BFP out of my athletes is 6%. I can't imagine what 1.5% looks like." He might have had 4% body fat, but certainly not 1.6%, since he was performing at the highest level of sports. You need at least some body fat. That fatty tissue plays a part in how the body regulates glucose and cholesterol. You need it for energy storage and energy release. When people go too low, almost everything in their body is affected, including the cardiovascular system, the nervous system, the endocrine, renal, skeletal, and gastrointestinal systems. That means with too little body fat, you're possibly looking at heart failure among other many things. You're definitely opening yourself up to a myriad diseases, since malnutrition affects the immune system. Okay, so let's go back to the start. When we introduced a man, a legend of bodybuilding, one who apparently once got down to 0% body fat. Is this possible? Before we answer that, let's explain that you have your storage fat and your essential fat. The storage is the fat you're aware of. But remember, we said fat is also on the inside. Some of it is essential. It's all around your brain, your nerves, and keeping in touch with your other organs. So, when the former Mr. Olympia Ronnie Coleman told the podcaster Joe Rogan that he once had only 0.33% body fat, it's likely he had quite a bit more than that. Even scanning machines might miss some of that essential fat. He wouldn't have been able to survive with 0.33% body fat, according to the experts. Even the so-called most shredded man on the planet, Helmut Stribel, has about 2% body fat when he's at his most ripped. When Arnold Schwarzenegger was at his best, when he was told to add some fat to his body to play Conan, he was likely about 8% body fat. Schwarzenegger said in an interview he went up to around 12% for that movie. Still, what about this legend of bodybuilding? His name was, and note we used the past tense was, Andreas Munzer. This guy was so insanely ripped that he was sometimes referred to as the man with no skin. He died at age 31 from multiple organ failure in 1996, with reports stating one of the reasons was his perhaps over-enthusiastic use of anabolic steroids. Still, doctors said this guy had pushed his body way too much. Pathologists couldn't believe what they were seeing. Writing in a paper for the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Munich, Germany, the pathologist said they could barely see any fat deposits on him. This was the fat under the skin, the subcutaneous fat. This man's use of various performance-enhancing drugs had damaged his body, but his lack of body fat was also blamed for his early demise. He had tumors all over his liver. The pathologist said part of his liver crumbled in their hands like polystyrene. His heart was damaged, his testicles were tiny, he was a walking train wreck. On the outside, he was a Hulk, but on the inside, he was a withered old man. No pain, no gain might be true, but when you add into the question no brain, an obsession can become incredibly damaging to your body. Now you need to watch why your muscles won't get any bigger, or check this out instead.